This is lesson 17.2, the beginnings of the population explosion. Got a lot to talk about here, but it is a very short presentation, so lots to talk about, short presentation. Essential question is, why did the European population rise dramatically in the 18th century? College Board topic 4.4 is all about the 18th century society and demographics. Explain the factors contributing to and the consequences of demographic changes from 1648 to 1815. In the 17th century, small landholdings, low productivity agricultural practices, poor transportation, and adverse weather limited and disrupted the food supply, causing periodic famines. But by the 18th century, the balance between population and the food supply stabilized, resulting in steady population growth. By the middle of the 18th century, higher agricultural productivity and improved transportation increased the food supply, allowing populations to grow and reducing the number of demographic crises, a process known as the agricultural revolution. And in the 18th century, plague disappeared as a major epidemic disease, and inoculation reduced smallpox mortality. Places, same basic places, England, Dutch Republic, the rest of Europe. So what was going on before this population explosion? Well, before 1700, population growth in Europe was slow and erratic. There were still lots of famine years. The plague had not left. The Black Death, it was still going round and round every year, though not nearly with the intensity of what it had been in 1347 through 1351. There was a devastating price revolution in Europe throughout the 1500s. That massive influx of Spanish silver made money cheaper, and this meant that those peasant laborers' money was worth a lot less every year. And so prices usually went up a lot faster than wages did. And that meant that common people could afford increasingly less food, housing, and fuel. There was still constant warfare going on all over the place, but after 1648, the military objectives of war were very different. In 1648, the 30 Years' War ended, and the Peace of Westphalia began. And as we know, the 30 Years' War was the last war of religion. In fact, by the time it was over, it wasn't really a war of religion itself anymore. And in a war of religion, your military objective is to wipe out entire communities of people who practiced the wrong religion. Many people were killed directly and deliberately by war, and many more people died as a result of all the disease and economic disruption that war brought with it. But after 1648, wars became more about power and politics than about religion. And military objectives shifted because they were now all about state building, not religion. Acquiring prosperous, productive territories, pushing out your borders and securing those borders. And territories are useless if the population is wiped out and the land's productivity is destroyed. So let's not do those things. So between 1700 and 1750, population and growth in Europe started to take off. But then, from 1750 to 1850, the population really started to explode. And the population of Europe actually doubled between 1700 and 1835. Now, that population growth was uneven. In other words, it wasn't happening uniformly the same everywhere. Populations where there was a lot more open space or even a frontier, like Russia or even over in New England, those places grew much faster than in places where there was less open space, like France. Why was there such dramatic population growth? Well, of course, we've got these advances in agriculture that we already talked about in the last lesson. There are new foods from America with higher caloric content like rice and corn, new types of beans, and especially the potato. There was also much better farm techniques that we discussed in the last lesson. There were also new opportunities in what we will call rural industry, which we will talk about in the next lesson. And these opportunities allowed women to marry at a younger age and thus have more children. Common rule of thumb: if you get married younger, you've got more time to have more children. So you're going to have more children. If you get married at an older age, then you've got less time to have children. So you'll tend to have fewer children. In short, population grew because there was a lot less death. There was also a decline in infectious diseases. Inoculation against smallpox appeared thanks in large part to the Ottoman Empire, actually. Smallpox had killed about 400,000 Europeans per year before that inoculation. Think about that. That is astounding. It's shocking. Otherwise, other medical advances of this time were of little significance. There was also the draining of mosquito-infested swampland for farming, and therefore there were fewer flies and mosquitoes around. So there was a lot less typhus, a lot less typhoid. There was also better transportation, better roads, better canals, and this lessened the impact of famine and disease because you could transport emergency food and supplies to affected areas much more quickly and easily. Famines, epidemics, and war were still a fact, but their severity was greatly reduced. In the year 1720, the Black Death hit the French city of Marseille bad. It stuck around for 2 years until 1722. It killed about 100,000 people. And then the Black Death, after nearly 400 years, mysteriously disappeared from Europe and never came back. And no one is sure why. The new monarchies were also a reason that there was a lot less death. Wars became less destructive and spread less disease. Monarchs fought wars more calculatingly for political and economic gain rather than for religion. And monarchs worked hard to build bridges and canals to aid transport and communication for their armies. So a potentially handy irony here is infrastructure was a way in which military expansion actually saved lives. Monarchs also made early improvements in the water supply.